Okay, so I have a number of inexpensive chisels. One could say cheap chisels. They're a bit dirty. I'm going to take some acetone and clean them up and resharpen them. Also get rid of some of the rust. But what I really wanted to show you, I'm not sure if you can see, the end of this chisel is chipped, not straight. We're going to fix that up on the grinder, regrind the bevel, and sharpen them, and they'll be good as new and probably better than new. Because, as I said, inexpensive chisels, which can be used like a good chisel as long as you spend the time. You see here, you can see machine marks across the chisel. So obviously it was not going to have the best edge, and this is probably the worst chisel. It's chipped here. Definitely not straight. So we'll clean these up and see how we go. Okay, this one is probably the worst, as you can see. It's rounded. It's got chips. It was covered in epoxy, which I've scraped off with another really bad chisel that I'm also going to have to grind. And then use some acetone to clean off the rest of the gunk that had built up on this chisel. So obviously I've been abusing my chisels. Now I'm going to make them into a good chisel and try to not abuse them. Okay, so basically what I've done is set up my guide at about 90 degrees because I'm just going to grind this until it's flat. I'll worry about the bevel later, and I'll just use the existing bevel to reset this, to grind the bevel. But I have 3 to do, so let's get started. Okay, so the chisels are squared up. They're looking pretty good along the edge. I'm gonna have a problem with these butt chisels in that they're not quite long enough. So I've set the bevel angle so that as I get like this and just grind, it will actually take the angle. So all I've done is adjust the rest to match this bevel or very close to it. And one thing to keep in mind as you get close to a thin edge, as we see here, the edge is no longer thin. Continually cool it by dipping it in a cup of water, which I have off screen. Okay, so not quite square, but getting there. Okay, so I'm going to start with my 300 grit diamond stone, switch to the 1000, and same way as a plain blade. Use a bit of cheap glass cleaner for lubricant. First, I'm going to flatten the back. You can see it's starting to polish, and there's a hollow spot here in the middle. So I suppose I'm really, like a plain blade, only concerned with the bottom bit, but can't hurt to clean this up. as flat as possible. Okay, it's definitely getting some polish on the end, which is where we need to get a sharp point on the chisel. Okay, pretty happy with that. Just give it a couple pulls, wipe it clean. Yeah, so the back of that chisel is good enough for me now. We'll do that for the remaining chisels, and then we'll work on the bevel. Okay, if we take a look there, you can see how hollow the back of the chisel was. We'll get this a bit better, but I'm not concerned about this bit, more the end of the blade. Overall, the flatter it is, the easier it'll be if you're registering it on a workpiece. But you know, like a plain blade, I'm happy if the last sort of 1/4 inch is flat. Okay, again, in just an example, let's see if I can get this. You can see how the back of the chisels are not flat. So go as flat as you want to. That's as flat as I'm going to go. I'm not doing super fine woodworking with any of these chisels. Some are better than others, so as you can see from the grime on this one, but it's been flattened here and around. This one needs a bit more work. Okay, so once I've done the backs until I'm happy, I'm just going to switch to the bevel. I could use my gauge, but the chisels have a much better bevel than the plain blade. It's easier to register here, so I'm just going to do this by hand. Basically doing a figure 8, starting to wear out my stone, trying to polish up this bevel that I've ground, and eventually, well, already you can feel a bit of a lip forming on the back of the chisel. So even on the factory bevels, there's a bit of hollows in them. They're not perfect. So I want to take all of that out. I'm almost there. Okay, so there is that same chisel where those hollows have been knocked out. Bit of a lip on the back, which we'll just pull off like that, and then I can see the lip across the front. And it's gone. I guess my biggest advice is patience. As you see, the 1000 grit diamond stone cuts a lot slower than the 300 grit stone for obvious reasons, and it brings out the imperfections. So you can see where I've ground that poorly on the edges. But I do have, or I will have, you know, a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch of good blade all the way across flat. So be patient, take your time. If you can't maintain the bevel, buy a jig or make a jig. No harm in using one of them. Okay, so I got an 8000 and a 3000 grit water stone. I usually just use this 3000 grit water stone to flatten the top of the 8000 grit, which I did off camera. So soak the water stone for 10 minutes or so, and then basically same thing. Going to flatten / polish the back, and it will come up to a mirrored finish after a few minutes. And then same thing in a figure 8, so I don't dish the stone in the center. I'm just going to follow the same process again. Till I get a slight burr in the back, and then I'll remove the burr by pulling across the stone. So let's get to finishing these chisels. Okay, so all the planes are done. Final step, leather strop, bit of honing compound. And I'll just do the back a couple times. And then on the bevel. And that gives a very shiny and a very sharp blade. I've already tested it by cutting a number of hairs on my arm. And yep, they work just fine. So we'll give the rest of these a bit of a strop. And then we'll call it finished. So basically that's it. How to get a cheap chisel into a nice flat and very sharp chisel. Okay, final thing I'm going to do, a bit of glass cleaner just to clean up the blades, and then I'm going to give them a coating of Silver Glide, which I've used before on the outside of some of my planes. It's good for tabletops, etc. This is basically to get rid of the grime from sharpening. And then a bit of the Silver Glide just to give it a bit of smoothness or slipperiness. It doesn't take much. Just going to rub it on. Helps prevent rust as well. Be careful of your very sharp blades that you just finished. And then for me, what I need to do next is build either a small cabinet for my planes, or my chisels, or get a chisel roll to protect these. Especially because although I do some work here in the shop, majority of this work's going to be out of the boat, where they're have to be transported. They're more likely to be damaged. And to keep them sharp, a couple strops with the stropping block after each use. And if you're really keen on keeping them super sharp, you could spend 2 or 3 minutes every time you use one of these chisels on the 8000 grit block, and that would be enough to keep them razor sharp all the time. Okay, so let that Silver Glide dry for a couple minutes, give it a quick buff, and that's it. How to take your crappy chisel and fix the ends, sharpen it scary sharp, and turn it into a good chisel.